All right, let us talk about some other writers. So moving on with my faves of the earliest portion of 2025, the first 6 months of 2025. I wanted to talk about the poet Wanda Coleman. And so before I talk about her actual poems, I think I need to talk about how I discovered her and kind of some other loosely associated ideas. So Wanda Coleman was one of the poets that was on Black Sparrow Press's roster and was published by them back into the 70s, early on in Black Sparrow Press, which is kind of how I learned of her name. I don't want to talk about Black Sparrow Press too much, but just to talk about it briefly, why the copy I have is interesting to me. So Black Sparrow Press was a press that actually printed their own books and were basically founded in the late 60s entirely to print Charles Bukowski's full-length poetry books. Charles Bukowski had been kind of an underground success, and it kind of remained an underground success, but he had only been published with very short chapbooks, and then City Lights worked with him, and then also he had that column called Notes of a Dirty Old Man. And so Black Sparrow Press, the founder of it, founded it literally to print Bukowski's books. But then as they started to grow their finances and their roster, they also printed some other new poets, and then also they reprinted out of print kind of avant-garde books in like a new printing of out-of-print stuff. It's interesting to me how when people mention the name Charles Bukowski, a lot of people cringe and run as far as they can in the opposite direction. And a lot of the main critiques of him, understandably, are like misogyny. I think when he was misogynistic, a lot of the times it was reactionary. Sometimes he was just trying to be inflammatory, and a lot of times he was joking, but I think he was like a man born in 1920, and he had a lot of, I think, resentment towards being hurt by women, and that came out in his writing. But I think it's interesting because I've found, so Wanda Coleman is one example, and then another Black Sparrow Press author who her name is Diane Wachowski. The influence in their poems, the influence that Charles Bukowski had is pretty clear when you read it, but also they've been clearly quoted as being influenced by Bukowski. Which, to go into what that means, seeing the influence is not really what I'm going to talk about today, because that would, I think, take away from the whole point, which is talking about Wanda Coleman. But I guess she did meet him once. I Googled it, or at least once, and then they were on the same press and were influenced by each other. So the press, Black Sparrow Press, it printed books from kind of like the late 60s until maybe 2005 or so, mid-2000s, early 2000s, and then closed. And the founder, John Martin, sold the rights to the most popular books for a bunch of money, and then kind of sold the rights to the lesser-known, lower-selling authors somewhere else. And so you can find Wanda Coleman's books in the original Black Sparrow Press printing style because, like I said, they printed all their books. It was basically like a former office shop. They would print the books, and that's how they got their start. You can find her books printed that way, but this one, which I purchased at Prairie Lights in Iowa City, it's one of the first ones I've seen since Black Sparrow Press opens its business up again in maybe 2020. Which it's interesting that it's taken me this long to find one. They are no longer the exact same style. They're more of a traditionally, it looks like they were printed in a press that might print any other book these days. But they still kind of try and imitate the original Black Sparrow Press style, which is kind of a a rough cardstock, and the actual shape of the book is the dimensions are unique to the Black Sparrow Press style. So I had already kind of been reading about her before that, just because I'm interested in the press, and then this one was the only one there, and so I wasn't going to get anything, and then I saw this, and I decided to check it out. The introduction is by Terrence Hayes, so some of you listeners out there might be familiar with him. Pretty popular in the poetry world, probably one of the more successful poets living today. And in his introduction, he talks about how much influence Wanda Coleman's work had on his own. So if you're a fan of his work and want to see kind of where his influence came from, this would be a great book to pick up. It's the selected poems. So I think I was on a gigantic rant last episode or 2 episodes ago or something, where I talked about how much I like selected poems or collected poems that collect the different books into they keep the books in their own little collections. It seems like this one is pretty abridged though. Like the first book, Mad Dog, Black Lady, there is only 6 poems, which I imagine the whole collection, unless it was a chapbook, was probably quite a bit longer than that. But yeah, I've been liking these poems. I mean, they're sad a lot. It seems like she writes about sadness pretty frequently, and then other times you can tell she's kind of flexing too. And like writes about poverty. There's a lot of poems about her, how bad her car is, and how unreliable her car is, and also still how much she loves her car, which is relatable. I was trying to think of a couple of them. Well, I think I'll read a couple sections right now, so if you will hold on just 1 second. So, first thing I'll say on this one, this is actually the end of a multiple page poem, but I kind of found it interesting. She's talking about being a teacher, and she says, I am fighting to stay in the classroom. No open minds. I am teaching Lord of the Flies, telling the youths about Manson and Jim Jones' Temple of Doom, sympathy for the devil, Altamont, Hell's Angels, and this girl looks up at me and says, are you making this up? So I thought that one in particular, just there's a lot of conversations now, not even conversations, people are banning books, people are banning what they can teach in schools, and that collection probably came out in like the 80s, so just think about those were the students back then who are probably the people making these decisions to ban books and to ban, what teachers can teach in schools, what can and can't be said in schools. So that one kind of stood out to me. I'm going to read some more like ones that I thought maybe I'd be more equipped to talk about though. So this is one that's more like I thought of being more confident and more, I think it's a little bit fantasy too. This is my second read through because I didn't like how I used the quotes in the last one. But it's called They Came Knocking on My Door at 7 a.m. Okay. All right. They had a warrant out for my arrest. What's your name? What's your identification? I was half naked, so they didn't come inside. Figured they caught me mid-fuck. They were right. Coitus interruptus. LAPD is a drag. I showed them alias number 3. They said, oh, well, where is she? I said, man, she was staying here, but she hooked up with someone and split. Okay. They left. I went back into the bedroom. You were naked and still hungry, curious. What was all that about? Nothing. I laughed, took off the rag I was wearing, eased into the sheets next to you. We started fucking again, but things had changed. Pretty gangsta. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but that poem does actually remind me of Bukowski a lot too. He had a lot of poems where it was like he was like taking out 100 gunslingers at a time, or like it's kind of bridging between fantasy and like criminal activity, but it's still like so hyperbolic that you're not really supposed to take it literally. So that kind of reminded me of that. I liked that poem a lot. There's another one that I'm not going to read, but it's called Miss Pac-Man. And it is about her at an arcade playing Miss Pac-Man. But what I thought was interesting, that wasn't like blatantly in your face about it. I had never thought about this. But she's describing like putting quarters in. And then she's describing Miss Pac-Man eating the dots. And it's almost like I never really thought about putting the quarters in, mimicking the Miss Pac-Man eating the dots. It's almost like you're putting quarters in and then Miss Pac-Man is eating them. It's almost like the video game is doing something unknowing to many people, like taking the money. But yeah, maybe I'll talk about this book some more because I am still kind of flipping through it, reading it out of order, in order, etc. And she feels very contemporary. And I think probably if people were looking for someone to read, I would suggest her work for sure. Or even just looking her up online, I guess. But this one is called, I already forgot, Wicked Enchantment Selected Poems. And then I think, so that must mean all of her older books that are collected in it might be out of print, but you might still be able to find them on like eBay too. I know she wrote prose and stuff, but this is kind of my first introduction to her work.